Good day, Dr. C.
Big man, what's up?
I'm good. How you doing?
It's been better, man.
Better?
I've been better, but good, hanging in there. You know what's the last couple of weeks have been like in Lagos, right? And the very, very, very sad, tragic events that happened October 2020, when basically we had the equivalent of government-sanctioned killings of young civilians. So I don't think I'm alone, right? I think we're all just sort of shocked, bruised, and just really, really sad about that. But yeah, so memories, our thoughts, prayers with the families, everyone affected. But yeah. How about you? What's up?
Good. Always happy to be here.
Likewise.
Always happy to get some good knowledge, some inspiration. So which one do you have?
No pressure, right? No pressure. So yeah, I think today, let's go down the inspiration route, right? Like we all need to pick me up, right? After everything that's happened. And what happened this week globally, right? A lot of people's attention has been on the US elections. Fair enough, very, very important moment in history. But kind of went a bit under the radar, except you're in the finance world. The largest ever IPO, public markets, stock markets, the world's largest ever IPO occurred this week.
Wow.
Yeah. Raised $30 billion, over $30 billion for a company that's now valued at about close to around $320 billion. 16-year-old company. It went simultaneously on the Hong Kong and Shanghai public stock exchanges. Company called Ant Group. Are you familiar with?
Yes,
Ant?
You did send me an article about that.
Ant Financial, right? Yeah, exactly. Many people may not be familiar with Ant Financial, but they will be familiar with Alibaba, right? They will be familiar with Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, the founder of Ant Financial. So why am I talking about Ant Group or Alibaba, Alipay, whatever you want to call it? Well, coincidentally, I had earmarked a book this week to read, and this was the book, right? The House That Jack Ma Built, by Duncan Clark, talking about the early years, the story of Alibaba, basically. And what's interesting was how Alipay came about, right? So this was in 2004. This was when Alibaba was still really trying to figure out what it was, right? As a company, and it was still trying to find its feet. It had a lot of competitors in the early internet market in China, and a big global player had just come into the space, eBay. Right? At the time, eBay was relatively fresh off its own IPO, which happened a few years before, was flushed with cash and all of that, right? And Alibaba is still this struggling company trying to survive. Anyways, the big problem back then that they were confronted with, that Jack Ma and his team, they were confronted with, was how can you be an e-commerce business, an online shopping, trading business or platform, if people cannot actually buy online, right? So they did not at the time in China. This is 2004, so we're not talking that long ago, but at the time in China, credit cards were not necessarily an option for most people. Banks all had their own cards. Union Pay was sort of relatively new at the time, but basically just seeing a product you like, buying it online and paying for it online was not common, right? It was very difficult to do. So that was the big problem they were having, right? Another big problem they were having was trust, right? Again, 2004, e-commerce at the time was significantly non-adopted at the time in China. And so if I pay you and I send you a check, right, how do I know you are sending the product back? So this was the big problem they had. So what does this little company do? And then you're coming up against eBay and all these others. What did they do? They set up Alipay. At the time, it was a very rudimentary, basic service. It was an escrow, right? You like a product, right? send us your check. When we receive the check, we'll hold it. We'll tell the seller that we have the check. The seller will send you the product. When you receive the product, if you like it, tell us and we release the check to the seller. If you don't, return it. Very basic.
And what escrow means?
Escrow, right? Yeah, escrow. So that's just like that's basically what they were doing. So nothing too crazy, but at the time people thought like, what a stupid business model, right? How are you gonna make money out of this? Blah blah blah. But for them, their focus was just, we want to solve a problem for our customers so they can come and enjoy this, gold mine that's gonna be internet selling or whatever. Anyway, so this little, stupid idea is what became Alipay, is what became the Ant Financial, is what became Ant Group, which is now today worth $320 billion, with the largest ever IPO in the world.
Wow.
Right? I'm glad you found you have that reaction. So that's what I want to talk about today, right? I want to talk about three things that really sparked out of following Ant Group this week and going back and reading your story and how they came about. So the three things that I want to talk about, right, that sort of came out of this whole, going back and following the beginning of Alibaba and Alipay, Ant Group, and then this IPO and all of that. The first thing was optimism. Right, optimism, which seems to be in very short supply these days, right? Like the world is up in flames, right? Everywhere you look, but it's just so important, right? For an entrepreneur, for what we are all trying to do here, what we're all trying to build, right? We're trying to do things that haven't been done before. You cannot do it and be a pessimist, right? And people say, yes, you have to be real, you have to look at the facts, 100%. But at the same time, you have to be optimistic. Right, it is so key. So Jack Ma, the founder of this company, he was narrating how when he had this light bulb moment that they need to do this financial service, they went to the banks, right? And what did the banks say?
No.
Yeah, they basically told him, get the F out, right? Yeah. You're too small, like we don't understand this, what's internet, selling, what's e-commerce, and all of that, right? Yeah. So, and of course you get that from bank after bank after bank. So if you're not an optimist in that situation, you give up, right? You give up. But if you're an optimist, then you tell them that they're wrong and you're going to be right and you'll be proven to be right later. Well, guess what? Alipay, the platform, the app, is responsible for 10% of non-mortgage loans in China today. 10%, right? The banks now are vying for customers on that platform. So now what is happening, we're seeing a shift, and I strongly suspect we're going to see this shift across the rest of the world. We're seeing a shift where the banks no longer have the direct relationship with the customers, with the clients. This is a relationship they've had for centuries now, since basically banking was invented, right? But now it is through this platform. So now they have the power after 16 years, right? So you need to be an optimist. And I know the whole world is really shitty right now, but as an entrepreneur, as someone who's trying to innovate and create something new, you have to be an optimist. So the second key message that I want to pass across, and that sort of came up to my mind from this, was revel in being the underdog and avoid competition. Revel in being the underdog and avoid competition.
Major key.
And again, obviously I've been using Ant Group as the no pun intended, right? Given that ants are small. But that was, by the way, that was also sort of the idea because when they launched Alipay, the ant was their mascot. And the idea was that it's better to have many ants working together than a big elephant, right? Anyways, so revel in being the underdog, right? And that sort of put my mind to a book I read a few weeks ago, and I think you saw me going through this earlier today. So this book, How I Built This, right? Fantastic book. I recommend everyone pick it up as soon as possible. And basically, there were two companies there that really caught my attention. One was this company called 5 Hour Energy, or at least the product they have, 5 Hour Energy. So 5 Hour Energy is this very small, I think it's a 2-ounce energy shot, right, that launched in 2003. At the time, it's a brand new company. It was owned by someone who wasn't from the industry or anything, right? This guy, Manoj Bhagarav, a retired plastics businessman, whatever. Anyways, at the time, his big challenge was, first of all, no one knew who he was. He couldn't go up against Red Bull and Monster energy drink, right? Second of all, he would have to be competing for shelf space in the stores with those two companies I've called, Red Bull and Monster Energy, but also Coca-Cola, Budweiser, all these other huge companies, right? And you're not going to take Coca-Cola off your shelf for a little known brand new company, right? And then third of all, this was 2003, the energy drink market was so new and not very lucrative, so really nobody cared, right? But what happened? What happened was that Raj had a light bulb moment where he thought, just because I'm tired does not mean I'm thirsty too. Right? So basically, you know, Red Bull or Monster, you see how big those drinks are, right? He realized that to give people the quote unquote energy you need, and by the way, I'm not endorsing any of these products, but to give people the energy you need, you don't need that size. You just need a little bit, right? And so he basically figured out a way to, first of all, just have the concentrated ingredients there, right, in that 2 ounce, and make the focus be around brain focus, right? And they called it vitamins for the brain. That was kind of the idea, right? So those were just the ingredients they had there. And so what that did was, first of all, it really made them insignificant to Red Bull and Monster, because to them, you're not my competitor, right? That's one. Two was that it therefore made it that it did not need to be refrigerated, right? So that meant he didn't have to compete with Coca-Cola, Budweiser, Pepsi, all the other guys for shelf space, because those guys are in the refrigerator, right? What then happened was that because of the size, it was on the cash, it was at the cash register, which is where people make most of their impulse buys on products they've never used before. Because you're about to pay, you're like, oh, what's this little thing here next to the pack of gums, right? And condoms, right? So it was just a very, very sort of smart strategy, right? And then it also meant that because it was vitamins focused, it meant that it could go into the natural food store and the health food store, right? So it went on GNC, which at the time was the largest, this 2004, was the largest sort of natural vitamin supplement store in the US at least. So yeah, and today 5-Hour Energy has 93% of the energy shot business in the world, right? So it has a dominant monopoly basically, right? Reveling being the underdog. Another example from how I built this that really caught my attention was the story of Five Guys, right? So Five Guys is this popular, I'll call it sort of, it's like a cult brand now, right? Because it's so popular. It's a burger joint, basically burgers and fries is what they do, but they do it really, 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 really well. And this company was started in 1986 by Tony Burrell, I believe is his name, and I might be messing up the name. Anyways, it was started with him, his wife, and his 4 sons, hence Five Guys. But Tony and his wife, they were serially failed entrepreneurs, and they were starting this company in 1986, the middle of an economic downturn. And their big idea was to open a burger joint in Arlington, in the US. And they didn't have money. They didn't have a lot of money, I should say. The banks were not going to give them a loan in that economic situation for people who have never run a restaurant before to start one. And so they could not afford a store in a good location, right? So remember, they always say location, 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 right? If you're in retail, if you're in fashion, restaurant, whatever, get a good location, central, blah, blah. Anyways, they couldn't. So what they decided to do was they decided to get a very cheap place in a poor location, right? Invest more into the quality of the food, right? And actually take time to prepare the burgers, right? So what happened? What happened was that people would find this place by some luck, realize that the burgers are so good, and they go home or they go back to their office after lunch and they talk about it. And there was a big word of mouth buzz, right? All of a sudden, more and more people started coming in and they started having lineups, right? And myself, I think I've waited once with my friend, Dr. Perez, bit of an asshole, but a good guy. We've waited once for maybe 45 minutes out of Five Guys in Montreal, right? But this is how they started, right? And then there was sort of this buzz about the business and about what they were doing. And so they want to open a second store. Guess what? The banks still thought they were crazy, right? The banks wouldn't give them the money. So they decided to raise what they needed from family and friends, but they decided to go with the same strategy, which is don't locate where everyone else is, the main streets or the big streets. Go somewhere off, let people actually come, find you, realize how good you are, and then speak about you. So again, if they were, now looking back, right, they realized that if they were on the main street where you had McDonald's, KFC, Burger King, and wherever else, they would have been eaten alive. Again, no pun intended, right? They would have been eaten alive by those other brands, by those already established brands.
Right.
Revel in being the underdog, find smart ways to get around it. Which brings me to my third and final thing. So the third and final thing, right, is a quote from a recent Financial Times article I read, actually this morning, about this Ant Group company, and a quote by one of their staff that said, "Innovations happen when there are lots of challenges." Innovations happen when there are lots of challenges, right? And I think that's something that every entrepreneur needs to sort of repeat to herself every morning, every hour even, right? Maybe every half hour. And we've had this conversation before, right? About why disruptions often rarely ever come from the incumbents in an industry, right? The established players in the industry. They always come from like an upstart or startup, right? And I mean, we're living through these constraints, right? With color cares and trying to build that out. And it's so important, right, to realize that these challenges that you're going through are a spur for innovation, right? And I look back, for me, like my own personal journey as an entrepreneur, and I remember exactly 5 years ago when I just started what morphed into Maison Le Porem, right? I started it with only $22,500 at the time. I spent $500 on the website. And $2,000 was my budget for samples, for marketing, for all of that, right? Anyone who's ever tried to hire a model knows you're not gonna get a model. You're not gonna get models with that, with $2,000. You also need product for the models, right? So anyways, what I decided at the time was my samples were gonna be my suits. So I made suits for myself and I turned myself into a model overnight and I took pictures and stuff. And that's how I created the buzz. And then I started doing the same thing for my customers. Saying, hey, I can turn you into a model. When your suit is ready, I'll do a photo shoot for you for free. And now you're my model. But guess what? When you do a photo shoot for a client, they post it on your Facebook. Or at the time, Facebook was the main thing, right? And then later on Instagram. But they post it and everyone's like, whoa, dude, are you a model now? They're like, oh no, I just went to this guy who made a suit for me. And that sort of became our marketing innovation early on, right? So anyways, long story short, whenever you're backed in a corner as an entrepreneur, you don't know what to do, you don't have enough money, regulations, government, whatever, innovations happen when there are lots of challenges. That's it for today, man.
Awesome, beautifully said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.